And the gospel lesson today will come from Luke's gospel in the 19th chapter. It's the story of Zacchaeus. You may have heard this story before. If you haven't, let me just catch you up a little bit. Jesus comes into the city of Jericho, and a great crowd gathers around him. That's an interesting dynamic. We'll talk a little bit about it, but it's not really about the crowd. It's about Jesus' interaction with a man named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is a tax collector. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, tax collectors in the first century were not well liked. Why? Well, in part, you can imagine why, because we don't exactly like tax collectors. We think about the IRS and we don't want them to come knock on our door. We wouldn't particularly care for that. But it's an even deeper hatred. There's even more complexity to it than that, because in the first century, it wasn't just like we think of IRS agents. We know they're doing a job. So we don't think of them as the lowest of low, the scum of the earth, like they did in the first century. It's even more intense because the Jewish people who became tax collectors were considered traitors to their people, to the people of God, because they began to work for the Roman occupying government that they didn't want to have occupying them. So there's this deep level of feeling that they've been betrayed by these tax collectors. But it goes even deeper than that. You see, in the first century, the practice of tax collecting was that Rome would issue certain certificates that allowed people to collect taxes. And they were supposed to collect so much money from each person. Let's say they were to come and collect $5 from you. But the permit allowed them to collect as much as they wanted from you. So though they have to send back $5 to Rome, they may collect $35 from you and pocket 30. They're making a lot of money off their own people, because they've been traitors and received this certificate to become tax collectors. They are really hated. And Jesus will come across this man named Zacchaeus. Not only is he a tax collector, he's a chief tax collector. The tax collector of tax collectors. The intensity of the hatred cannot be underestimated here. This would be like a serial rapist on the loose, allowed to be legally among us. He is hated. You know the children's song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. Kind of cute, right? This isn't a cute story, though. This is a story about a man who is hated, which makes it even more remarkable when Jesus interacts with him the way that he does. Let's listen for God's word. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead, and he climbed up a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down, and he was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble, saying, "He's gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half my possessions, Lord, I'll give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When Jesus came into town that day, a crowd gathered around him, and I imagine that the crowd gathered around him much the same way that crowds gather today. Oh, sure, the reason they gather is Jesus, but it's a little bit more complex than that. There are more reasons than just that. For instance, I bet some people came because they knew that Jesus could heal people. He has started to become kind of a big deal at this point because of his healing and his teaching. And so if you know Jesus is coming into town, and let's say you're paralyzed, I bet you're going to go out into that crowd to try and get Jesus to pay attention to you. Or I bet if you have a sick daughter at home who's been sick for several days now, her fever's not going down, and there's no antibiotics in this culture, I bet you don't spend that afternoon watching Oprah at home. I bet you're in the crowd trying to get Jesus' attention, because he can heal people. I bet that there are some people there who want to debate with Jesus, who want to listen to him. Jesus is famous for his teaching and debating. We see the scribes and the Pharisees do this with him throughout the Bible. So it's not impossible to imagine that there are those in the crowd. In fact, it's very likely that there are those in the crowd who are interested in having a theological discourse with Jesus. There are some that are there for that reason, to be sure. Then there are some people there who just want to see what all the fuss is about. I bet, whether you will admit it or not, that you have probably seen, because you've gone to take a look at it, the Miley Cyrus performance on the MTV Video Music Awards. Not because you necessarily condone or disapprove one way or another of what she did, but you just want to see what all the fuss is about, what everybody's talking about on the news. And it's the same concept here. People just want to see what everybody's talking about. Jesus, there are some people who were certainly in the crowd that day for that reason. When Jesus came into Jericho, there were other people who were in the crowd just because they didn't have anything else to do that day. That's probably a good reason to go and see what the crowd is doing, because you're bored. So people are in this crowd for a variety of different reasons. Absolutely, it's just common sense. But Zacchaeus is not there for any of those reasons. Zacchaeus is there that day because he's lost. I don't mean that he took a wrong turn in Jericho, that he didn't know geographically where he was. I'm sure he knew the town well. But socially, he had no friends. He'd burned all his bridges. He was lost. Spiritually, he was dead inside, absolutely lost. Emotionally, maybe depressed, just lost. Zacchaeus is in the crowd that day because he's lost. And Jesus passes by the tree, looks up and says, Zacchaeus, come down. I'm going to your house today because the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost. And everyone in the crowd begins to murmur, begins to grumble. And I can imagine why. I brought my daughter out today to get healed by Jesus. She's an innocent little girl. This man is a wicked man. He is a sinner. And my girl needs healing, Jesus. You pass right by me to go to this man? Or maybe the scribes and Pharisees have been preparing for weeks for Jesus' arrival in town. They've got all their points laid out, ready to talk to Jesus, and he goes by to be with this wicked man, this sinner. I can imagine why they're grumbling. There's discontent bubbling just beneath the surface. But Jesus makes it clear to all who are listening that the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. And I think this is why so many good Christians in the Western world today miss the gospel of Jesus Christ completely. Because they don't understand that verse 10. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. We don't like being lost. We don't like to admit when we are lost. I remember one time my dad was taking my brother to a specialist in Dallas. My dad was pretty familiar, at least he used to be pretty familiar with the streets of Dallas, and so he thought he would have no problem finding this place. Well, he goes into Dallas, and they are hours late for the appointment. I don't even remember if they got in. But when they got back, my brother was just laughing and laughing because my dad was so lost. Now, he wouldn't admit that, though. They were looking for Inwood Street in Dallas, I believe it was. And my dad said, I know we were on Inwood Street. They just renamed the street. They moved the street. They must have. He would rather concede that they had moved an entire street before he would concede that he was actually lost. And I'm sure you have your stories too. The man who doesn't want to pull over and ask for directions because he'd have to admit that he's lost. We don't want to be lost. We don't want to be lost in our spiritual life either. We want to say, no, I'm basically a pretty good person. I can figure this out. If I can just, I made some mistakes, but I can get back on track. I'm not really lost. I'm just kind of, wandering around here in my spiritual life. But the truth is we are lost. The word that is used here in the Greek is apololos. Kind of a funny word, but it's got a really intense meaning. To be lost, but not just that, it's the perished. It's the ruined. it's not just lost, it's the hopelessly lost, the absolutely broken. And these are the people that Jesus came to save. You see, we have such a hard time with that because we want to believe that we can do it. We can figure out how to get back on track, how not to be so hopelessly lost. But the reason we think this is instead of comparing ourselves to the Holy God, what we end up doing is we end up comparing ourselves to each other. And we say, look, I'm not lost. I'm not nearly as bad as they are. At least I don't lie like he does. At least I don't steal other people's boyfriends like she does. At least I don't drink like they do. And all of a sudden we are comparing ourselves to everyone else around and we make ourselves feel pretty good. We're not really that bad. But friends, that's like a convicted felon in a maximum security prison pointing to the other felon saying, well, at least I'm not as bad as you are. Friend, you missed it. You're a felon in prison. And we are sinners who have fallen terribly short of the glory of God. That's why we miss it. That we're lost. Helplessly broken. Without a hope apart from Jesus Christ. Here's what happens. When we don't really believe that we're lost, all of a sudden Jesus becomes our homeboy. Have you seen those shirts? Jesus is my homeboy. We just want to shoot the breeze with Jesus and talk about the truth, man. Maybe you've seen the bumper sticker, Jesus is my co-pilot. This is what happens when we don't really believe that we're lost. Jesus is our co-pilot. He's sitting in the seat next to us with the map trying to tell us how to get to the way. When we don't really believe that we're lost, Jesus is just a great moral teacher who can help us figure out how to really live right. But here's the thing. Jesus doesn't want to just talk to you about the truth. Jesus doesn't want to just tell you where the way is. He doesn't just want to tell you how to live right. Jesus says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And no one will come to the Father except through me. We're lost. And he's the way. He's the truth. He's the life. And he's come to seek and to save the lost. Friends, that's exactly where we find Zacchaeus today. He's lost. For all the money that he has, he can't buy happiness. Here's a grown man, powerful, wealthy, fine clothes, and we find him in a tree like a little boy. He's lost. The good news is that's why Jesus came. He came for the lost. He didn't come to heal people, although he did heal people. He didn't come to debate and to teach, although he did debate and he did teach. He didn't come to set up church, although he did set up church. He came to seek and save the lost. You know, if you're not lost, I can't help you. If you're a pretty good person and you just need a little extra help, let me recommend Barnes & Noble. They have a great self-help section. Unless you understand that you are a wretched traitor of God, that you have turned your back on everything that is good. Unless you really understand that, then you will constantly reduce the gospel, as so many churches do. You'll reduce it to, let's just be nice to each other. Let's just listen to what Dr. Phil has to say and go on our merry way. But friends, that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is that he came to seek and save the horribly, wretchedly lost. That's me.